The Victorian Government wants a nationwide licensing scheme for all labour hire firms. Its sweeping inquiry into the unregulated labour hire market found a licensing system is crucial to stopping the abuse of vulnerable workers. The report released today details abuse, exploitation and in some cases sexual harassment of farm workers, manual labourers and cleaners. In Melbourne, Tom Nightingale.
Underpayment, exploitation and, in some cases, sexual harassment. The Victorian Industrial Relations Minister Natalie Hutchins hopes a new 430-page report will smash the dark side of casual labour hire.
This industry has been unregulated for too long, and what we will be doing is putting a system in place to ensure that this doesn't happen in the near future.
Mr. Enforcement's already a problem. How do you make sure you don't just send it underground?
Well, look, one of the recommendations in this report, and something that we'll be taking very seriously, is that this needs to be national regulation and that the Commonwealth needs to get on board with this.
Charles Cameron is with the Recruiting and Consulting Services Association, representing labour hire companies.
Those who are actually engaging in this type of behaviour, they're not actually part of our industry, a professional industry of workforce services. We're very happy to dob in a dodgy.
He says talking about it is one thing, stopping it is another.
A lot of this exploitation is occurring in regional locations where it's very difficult for the Fair Work Ombudsman to find and let alone prosecute them. They often don't have fixed premises. They operate with a phone. They operate quite often relying purely upon, let's say, social media to attract the workers. They really do everything to work under the system. So one of the issues we have some concern about is if they're already operating in the black market, if they're already operating outside the law, how is it that a system of government regulation will actually bring them into the fold?
The industry isn't supporting Victoria's approach for tougher regulation.
Those who are doing it right currently are known as expensive labour hire. Our concern is that the imposition of a licensing system, which our industry will presumably be required to pay for, will simply make the reputable labour hire firms even more expensive. So we actually think it's very important to also work very much with the buyers of labour hire. Without funding the dodgy labour hire providers by using them, there is no industry of exploitation. So we're very much of the mind that there needs to be an onus and a responsibility of the industry that buys workforce services to only use reputable operators.
But a licensing system would achieve exactly that.
The licensing system could achieve that. The concern we have is that if it's state-based, we end up with our members operating, of course, across state lines and actually having...
The Victorian government's talking about a national approach.
They are, but that's not what's being contemplated at a federal level currently. We've done a lot of work with the federal government to look at the solution. We had a roundtable on vulnerable workers that we attended earlier this week.
Just to clarify, do you want the federal government to bring in a national scheme?
We don't want the federal government to bring in national licensing. What we have proposed is that they adopt our Employment Services Industry Code.
That code would be run independently, for example, by the ACCC. The Victorian Minister, Natalie Hutchins, denies tougher rules will push prices up.
I think that it will make those labour hire companies that open up overnight, get themselves an ABN and go out of business a couple of weeks later, reopen in another name, and there's plenty of examples of that happening, and we call that sham contracting. That will come to an end. But there is plenty of work there for labour hire companies that are doing the right thing to pick up the shortfall.
The report was produced by Professor Anthony Forsyth from RMIT University.
We have to level the playing field. We have some lower level labour hire operators who are taking advantage of vulnerable workers, and the licensing proposal would eradicate that.
Exploitation can pretty easily cross state borders. How useful will a Victorian licensing scheme be if it doesn't happen in other states as well?
The Victorian labour hire licensing scheme is important because I think Victoria needs to lead the way on this issue. My recommendation is for a national scheme through COAG to be developed, but I don't expect that we'll see the federal government implement that. And what I've suggested is that the states need to lead the way. South Australia's labour hire inquiry last week recommended a similar proposal, and a Queensland labour hire inquiry has also looked into it. So if a number of states take action, then that will help.